During this week and next week, we're going to tackle these questions that you see in front of you. But really, the answer to the first question about effective reading instruction is going to be the focus of this whole class. We're going to start with some basics like strong motivation and good planning. For starters, you read about those concepts in your chapters this week. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to review this concept from last week's activity about the 13 identifying categories from IDEA. The difference between SLD, which, as you probably know already, is a specific learning disability, and an intellectual disability. An SLD is the brain's ability to process, store, and/or respond to print, language, or math, and it's related to achievement. It's very different than an intellectual disability, but people often confuse the two. An intellectual disability is a neurodevelopmental disorder that results in low intellectual functioning in thinking and adaptive behaviors, and it's related to a person's ability. So I want you guys just to be really clear about these two concepts. From your reading, and specifically in Chapter 2, you probably remember this idea. And as students, you're probably very attuned to this notion that you need to be motivated to really learn. Reading is hard for the students we're working with, so we need to be extra creative and have extra energy in creating strategies and lessons that motivate them. Balanced instruction doesn't necessarily mean equal parts of everything. It means that we need to be mindful that we are teaching everything, all components of the reading process. Remember the rope that we looked at last week? We need to be sure we're actually teaching those components of the process. Some students might not need all skills to be explicitly taught. Most often, however, the students who are struggling learning to read, our students, will need clear strategic reading instruction. And that means it's explicit reading instruction so that they can learn the component skills. Finally, effective classrooms and teachers make sure that all students in the class are learning, not just the A-gamers or the easy-to-teach students. Teachers need to be creative and use all the resources they can gather to make sure instruction is effective for everyone. A one-size-fits-all approach is probably not going to be effective for all students, and one-size-fits-most is just not acceptable. That's not effective teaching. The strategies presented in Chapter 2 are going to benefit all students. You're going to do an activity this week where you're going to interact and think about these ideas pertaining to what the National Reading Panel found is the most important components of reading instruction. You were introduced to those ideas last week. For the question, what is a curriculum? We're going to address that first by considering standards that guide the development of any curricula. Curriculum or curricula guide our instruction, providing a scope and sequence for what content we teach and how to teach it. That's the curriculum. The standards that we follow guide the curriculum. Since 2014, we've adopted the Common Core standards. Each state has the opportunity to modify up to 10% of them, so they're called the Common Core State Standards, the CCSS. And there's a link to the state standards for English Language Arts on the Canvas course page. 42 states adopted the Common Core State Standards. 8 haven't. You can use Wikipedia to find out which 8 haven't adopted them. You've probably already watched the Common Core video that gives you a brief introduction to the concepts behind why the Common Core was developed. The standards for English Language Arts are the same kindergarten through high school. However, the requirements within each standard become more complex. For example, in kindergarten, under the reading standard for comprehension and analysis of grade level appropriate text, the standard states, use pictures and context to make predictions about story content. In grade 9 and 10, it states, prepare a bibliography of reference materials for a report using a variety of consumer, workplace, and public documents. The key standard, comprehension and analysis of grade level appropriate text, remains the same. So you can see how it kind of increases the complexity over time. And the English language arts standards include all those components you see on the screen. Reading, writing, speaking and listening, meaning receptive and expressive language, language, and media and technology, which is integrated throughout all of the standards. The English language arts standards also include anchor standards for each one of the key ideas. So those are concepts like key ideas and details from the literature or from informational text, craft and structure about those different kinds of text, integration of knowledge and ideas, and a range of reading and level of text complexity. For the majority of this class, we're going to focus on foundational skills that are typically mastered by grade 5. But for our students who we've already identified as struggling readers, of course, these skills, with the exception of probably print concepts, will continue to be learned and practiced through high school for most of our students. We'll go into considerably more depth on these skills during class. The standards guide the curriculum, and the curriculum guides our instruction. But within our instruction, we need to be sure we're using evidence-based practices, those methods for which there is strong evidence that supports their use. If we don't have evidence-based practice, we need to use field-tested best practices. Those are methods that we've seen to be effective from other people's use or our own use. It's tricky, though, in education, because what is traditionally accepted as rigorous is not always possible. We can't harm children. So we use degrees of evidence in this class, including action research, all the way up through experimental research. So we always need to be aware of the level and the rigor of the evidence that we're using. Is it evidence-based practice in a very traditional sense, like experimental, randomized trials, large scale? Or is it action research, which is more classroom-based? Or is it a field-tested best practice that doesn't yet have evidence, but still can be supported? Now on to assessment. During this semester, you guys are going to learn how to administer an informal reading inventory and IRI. We're going to talk more about assessment in particular in a few weeks. So I just want to plant the seed here that reading assessment can be informal or formal. We're going to practice a formal one. Whoa, not formal reading assessment. You're going to be doing an informal assessment, the informal reading inventory. We need to figure out, what does the student know about reading, and what skills does the student have that shows they're a good reader, or what skills do they need to develop? So finally, one of our last topics for this little module is introducing the ideas of differentiated instruction and UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. And we want to start to think about how and where they fit into our instruction. This is not going to be the end of our conversation, but just your first exposure. The notion of both of these concepts is that all instruction should be for all learners. That means no one in the class should be sitting in the back of the classroom coloring, for example, during a lesson just because that lesson is too hard for them. Each one of these constructs includes the idea of providing options for engagement. That's how the students interact with the concepts. Representation, meaning how we represent the concepts to the student, and action and expression, meaning how do they show us or demonstrate to us that they've learned the content we want them to learn. So UDL is proactive in that we design our lessons with these options in mind. And differentiated instruction is reactive in that we may modify a particular lesson on the spot or soon before the lesson to meet the needs of an individual student for a specific need. So in reality, we should be using both differentiated instruction and UDL to meet the premise or our goal that all instruction is accessible to all learners pretty much all the time.